Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tom Romero. Again, I'm the faculty here at the Sturm College of Law, faculty advisor to the Water Law Review. So I was telling our panelists today, I get the privilege of moderating this session, that as a teacher and an educator here at the law school, my classes that were after lunch are always my worst classes. Everybody's just feeling the bliss of lunch, and in my culture, that's siesta time. There's a really good reason we have siestas, which is to reboot our energy so we can make it long into the night. So we're going to do our best to keep you all engaged and excited, and to keep the momentum that's been going on from the morning and from our keynote address. This panel, Building Municipal Water Self-Determination in Diverse Metropolitan Communities, is actually designed to be a little bit of a hybrid and engaging in a variety of ways. As we put this panel together, and as we invited Khyla Craine, who's the Assistant General Counsel for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP, and her work and her organization's work directly involved in litigation surrounding the issues in Flint, Michigan, and other areas. We thought it'd be really important to bring in a organization like the NAACP, one that you don't typically think of when it comes to water, right, and water rights, into the conversation. And particularly with their work there, it seemed like an appropriate moment. And certainly building upon the discussion coming out of the plenary, we thought it was really important to have a community organization and a municipal water supplier at the table. So we have Lizeth Chacón, the Executive Director of the Colorado People's Alliance, that is doing work largely on behalf of low-income Latino communities in Northeast Denver, metropolitan area, including the Montbello neighborhood and the Commerce City neighborhood. And then finally Dan Arnold, who's a staff attorney on Denver Water. And so some of our thinking around this was, what would happen if we put these three people together and in some sustained dialogue and conversation with one another. So our panel today is actually going to be, like I said, a bit of a hybrid. Each of them are going to present for about 8 to 10 minutes on the type of work that they're doing, how and in what ways they enter this conversation from each of their different perspectives and their different constituents. I think it's really important to think about that as well. And then what we're going to do is we've actually been working for the last couple of weeks on developing a series of questions that we're going to do roundtable style. I have a list of questions that I'm going to start off with a few from to the panel. What I'm hoping, and this is the hybrid piece of this, I'm hoping to get all of you involved much earlier in the conversation. So what that means is all of you have been given note cards, and so as questions come up, I'm encouraging you to write questions on those note cards and pass them to the Water Law Review students. If you have a question, maybe just sort of wave it, and someone will come pick it up. They'll run those up to me, and they're going to do some sorting of that as well. But I'm also going to ask for live questions as well. So I know some of you are shy and don't want to talk, so that's why you have the note cards. Many of you are not shy, so please, as questions come up, just wave your hand too, and after we get through the first couple of questions, and we will get the microphone to you. So, without further ado, I'll turn it over to Khyla Craine.
All right. Good afternoon. Yeah, so my family's from the South, so we do a call and response. All right, we're going to try it again. Good afternoon. All right, and hey to everyone in the overflow room. I was hanging out with them earlier today. I bring you greetings from the nation's largest and oldest civil rights organization, the NAACP. On behalf of our 2,200 units across the country and on 3 military installations around the globe. It's a high honor for us to be here to speak to you a little bit about the work that we have done in this very important area. I play an environmental lawyer. I'm not really one. So if I say something that sounds weird, just be like, oh, she'll get it. Thank you so much to Sarah and to Lindsay for inviting us to be here. I'm so inspired by Lizzie's work, particularly with this symposium. This is an amazing group of people to bring together and talk about something that's so very important. And for me, coming new into this space as far as environmental justice work, learning more about the importance of having clean drinking water is something that we as Michiganders take for granted. I'm a native of Ann Arbor, Michigan, and surrounded by the Great Lakes. I think we take water access for granted. But as you'll see in some of the slides that I'm talking about, and I'm sure my colleagues on the panel, and as you probably know more than most, we really don't have the ability to take water, clean drinking, bathing water for granted. And as I talk about some of the work that we have done in Flint, I always start out this way. Hopefully this morning, you brushed your teeth. Hopefully this morning you were able to take a shower, a nice luxurious bath, whatever you choose to do, it's fine. Eventually, sometime during the day, you've washed your hands. Just nod, yes. Eventually, if some of you all have children, your children have gone to school possibly today, and they're drinking out of those great water fountains that are at our schools. And just imagine that you've done this all throughout the day and didn't know that your water was tainted. Imagine that you were trying to feed your children this morning and you had to pour them some, I don't know, oatmeal. That's what I usually have every morning. And the water that you were making that oatmeal was full of lead. Or hundreds of other carcinogens and toxins. And imagine that in one particular area, the state decided that it was more cost efficient for them to switch water and not determine whether or not it was acceptable to be drinking and bathing in it, and has now cost the lives of 9,000 children in one city. That's what we're dealing with in not only Flint, but in cities across the country. I want to talk a little bit about the work that we do at the NAACP, and I'll get back into what I was just discussing. The environmental and climate justice programs was begun in the NAACP in 2006. We started our work dealing with coal-fired power plants, air toxicity, and water pollution. And my director there, Jackie Patterson, has done a yeoman's work, I guess if you can say that, in really trying to attack this system from all sides, particularly the work that she's done across the country to shut down or attempt to shut down some coal-fired power plants. We have been involved in several litigation and public policy issues, including we intervened in the White Stallion versus EPA, which was combined with the Michigan versus EPA case that went before the Supreme Court. We have submitted public complaints to various public utility commissions, including in Indiana. And currently we're working on a solar equity project to bring communities of color into the conversation about how do you access solar power, particularly in Arizona. They have authored some fantastic reports about various environmental justice issues, and I encourage you to go to our website, naacp.org, and donate. I have to say that at least once, or I can't go back to Baltimore. And when you finish donating and becoming a member, you can look at some of the great work that our environmental and climate justice programs has done in compiling these reports. I'm going to skip through a couple of these things because I don't have that much time, but let's just talk about some of the problems. High levels of lead are found in cities, as I stated, all across the country. It's not just Flint. A report from Reuters, okay. A report from Reuters stated that over 3,000 cities had higher levels of lead in their water than Flint. And in 1,000 cities, they had quadrupled the level of Flint. It's worth an O. It's worth an O. According to the NRDC, coal-fired power plants have generated enough coal ash to fill the Mercedes-Benz Superdome 17 times. Now, if anybody was boycotting the NFL like I was last year, you may not have watched the activity going on in the Mercedes-Benz Superdome, but that is where the New Orleans Saints play. This race product contains harmful and carcinogenic materials such as mercury, arsenic, lead, chromium, and some of the nitrates that Camille was speaking about in her discussions just a few minutes ago. And too often, which is the reason why I'm here, these are impacted by poor, marginalized, politically depressed, and communities of color. I have this broken up in a couple of segments. One, no access. There's a big problem with rural communities across the country not even having access to clean drinking water. One case in particular is Sand Branch in Texas. Now this is really ridiculous to me. That there's a city, very small unincorporated city in Texas, in Dallas County in Texas, that does not have access to water. But it is like 3 miles away from a water treatment facility. And the county of Dallas has found it economically not viable enough for them to provide this unincorporated city within their county access to water. Like, it's not worth my money to provide you with water. And so the city has to coalesce within its community to provide itself with bottles of water. And I'm sure that many of you environmentalists know what bottles of water are doing with our, and polluting our environment. They also don't pick up trash or deal with sewage. This area is a poor, predominantly Black American unincorporated city, but it borders another unincorporated city that does have service of water by the same Dallas County. Flint, which is of course the one that grabbed headlines the last couple of years. The issues are so many, and I don't have that much time to go through it, but the fact of the matter is that it's called money and power. The state of Michigan stripped the city of Flint of its political power. It assigned it an emergency manager to take over the day-to-day operations, stripping the citizens of Flint their ability to have a person that is accountable to them about the decisions they make. The person that the emergency manager, the only person that the emergency manager was accountable to was the governor of the state of Michigan. They decided to switch the water source from the Detroit water system, which was fed through the Lake Huron, and switch it to Flint River. The Flint River had not sourced the city of Flint with this water for over 40 years. And over that time, if you have heard anything about Michigan, my home state, it tends to snow. And because of the snow, we put ice on the ground so people can actually go and drive. Because of that and so many other things, the water became corrosive. Unfortunately, those who were supposed to advise the city of Flint about how they should switch the system did not actually do the research they were supposed to do as engineering firms to determine how corrosive the water was. Because of the corrosiveness of the water, it started to eat away at the lead pipes that were still in existence in the city. They tried to overcorrect. They overcorrected by dumping twice as much of an acidic substance that's needed into the water, so they made an already problematic problem even that worse. And because of that and a whole host of things, as I stated before, 9,000 children in the city of Flint have been poisoned by this water, and they still do not have clean drinking water. If I may just take a couple minutes just to fly through a couple of the issues, additional issues that we're seeing across the country. This is just an example of what some of the things have, some of the outcomes of this water, having to bathe in it every single day, did to one young man. The circle part is a rash that he have on his neck. And because this city of Flint is very poor, they are trapped there. They can't leave because they don't have the economic resources to leave, but also because of the lead pipes and everybody knowing that the lead pipes are there and feeding into their homes, their property value has gone down. So I can't sell my house, even if I wanted to leave. So they're essentially trapped in a poison city. Very quickly, we filed litigation along with our friends at Cohen Millstein 2 years ago We're just now being able to receive traction and going through the litigation process because the state of Michigan, the city, as well as the 2 engineering firms that we sued, attempted to block us from being able to go forward to provide some relief to the citizens of Flint. Again, this is not just Flint. As I stated before, Pennsylvania, the Commonwealth, has 49 census tracts where at least 40% of the kids tested had high levels of lead. South Bend, Indiana, a southern town in Missouri. It's not just Flint, y'all. And so we have to get our arms around how do we ensure that folks have access to clean drinking water, clean bathing water, so that, as Camille said earlier, the dignity of human life. If 70% of your body is made of water, and you need water to sustain life, how is it that you can allow your fellow citizens to have access to poisonous water and nothing be done about it? Hopefully later on, or at least we can disseminate the rest of my PowerPoint, because I talk about some of the other pieces of litigation that we're dealing with around coal ash basins in North Carolina, and of course, what do we all need to do as citizens, as well as some of us are attorneys or budding attorneys, to empower our fellow citizens to be able to take back, to take ownership of this issue and to advocate on behalf of themselves and the rest of their communities. Thank you very much.
So I'll do it from right here, just because it's easier. So again, my name is Lizeth Chacón. I'm the Executive Director of Colorado People's Alliance. Our organization started in the fall of 2015. We started out of the union of 2 organizations that had been in the state of Colorado for about 20 years each. Rights for All People, which was primarily an immigrant rights organization in the Denver metro area, and Colorado Progressive Coalition, which was doing a lot of work around healthcare, police accountability, and economic justice organizing. Our organization is a member-led organization, so what that means is that individuals from the community are part of the organization and they lead the work. So like they're my bosses, I do the work for them. They lead the work from planning campaigns to evaluation to strategizing to doing the actions and everything else. We're also racial justice, so what that means is that we lead our work through a racial justice lens and we look to involve communities of color and working class communities in our work. We're grassroots multi-issue, so we have 3 areas of work. For our organization, we do work on economic justice issues. So in 2016, we led the efforts in Colorado with the statewide ballot measure to increase Colorado minimum wage to $12 an hour by 2020. We were successful, but we know that the economy in Colorado is working for some and not for all, and that our communities are facing a crisis and they can't afford to live in their communities. So right now we're looking into different efforts to move legislation forward that will allow municipalities to increase their minimum wage at a higher level than that of the state, to make sure that our communities are able to not just only survive, but also to thrive in their communities. We also do work on immigration. To be really honest, this has been a really challenging campaign in the last year. We've been battling a lot and a lot of different attacks, but we really look at the intersection of the different issues. We've led a lot of the work to protect dreamers, the youth that are here as undocumented immigrants, and really to push Congress to pass a solution for all DACA recipients, but also making sure that we don't forget about our parents, and that our parents did an act of sacrifice to bring us to this country, and that they don't deserve to be punished for that, right? So really fighting for the dignity and humanity of immigrants, and to make sure that we don't forget that aspect when we talk about immigration. And then the other campaign is climate, so climate justice. This campaign started out more as a fight to work against fracking in our communities. And then it evolved into 2 different areas, which is our water justice campaign, and then also a campaign that started last year with some of our community members to move Colorado into a just and equitable transition to renewable energy economy. So we are working with both labor unions, other environmental groups, and community organizations to find what do we mean with a just transition, because we all have different definitions of what that means, but also what are the principles that are going to get us there, because once we start looking at legislation, it gets really technical around what does that mean. So we're hoping to introduce legislation in 2019 to really push Colorado to move into 100% renewable energy while prioritizing and leading with the voices of workers and communities of color, which we know are most directly impacted by climate change. And our work on water, which is the focus of today, really sort of happened to us, right? As a community organization, we work to engage community in the different work. In 2016, and for the last 2 years, we started a Canvas program going door to door to talk to a community about fracking and if they knew, and to educate them. And we've knocked on over 5,000 doors, have had over 1,000 conversations with community in both Montbello and Commerce City. And to our surprise, when we were engaging people in that conversation, people came back to us and said, hey, I don't drink the water from my faucet. Is it because of fracking or what's happening? And then we started to ask more questions about the doors. So 50% of the people that we talked to, both in Commerce City and in Montbello, expressed that they don't feel like their water is safe and that they don't drink it, and that they buy bottled water as an alternative to drinking water from the faucet because they don't trust that their water is safe. To us, that's a huge concern. As an organization that is grassroots and it's led by community, we have to do something about the issue. Over 500 people tell you that they don't drink their water because they don't feel it's safe. That is an issue, and we need to address it and do something. So we started to work with community, and this year we're going to go back to the doors, specifically in Montbello and Commerce City, to engage community more in a solution to figure out what's happening with the water, because part of what we don't know is that this is super complex, and you probably have more information about how it all works. But is it the pipes? Is it the houses? Is it the piping in the house? Like, it could be a whole number of issues that are happening, and it might not even be how the water is distributed, and it might be just the problem within their own houses. We just don't know what the problem is, and the first thing for us is that we need to find that. So what we're gonna be doing this year when we go back to the doors is gonna be getting story collection. What's actually the issue? What's happened when you tried to drink your water? What is wrong with your water? And then the second component is going to be trying to figure out how to make sure that we support people with getting their water tested. Just because we don't think that those folks have actually reached out to any of the departments to get their water tested. And then to do some deeper research into what does that mean. And we found that to do some deep level testing of water in homes, it could be $1,000 or $2,000 for just one test. So it's extremely, extremely expensive for us as a community organization to try to figure out how do we actually support our community, and first figuring out what's wrong with the water so then we can proceed with them to make sure that we find a solution for the problem in the water. So that's a little bit of where we're at with our work on sort of water justice and really figuring out how do we solve this issue, because for us at the end of the day, we have to make sure that regardless of income, regardless of race, where you come from, if you're an immigrant or not, everyone deserves access to clean, safe drinking water. And from what we've heard at the doors, that is currently not happening in those two areas here in Colorado.
Good afternoon. My name is Dan Arnold, and I'm an attorney with Denver Water. Before I get going, I want to thank Lindsay and the law school and Professor Romero for the opportunity to be here today. And I also want to say that I'm honored to have the opportunity to share the stage with my co-panelists, and looking forward to our discussion this afternoon. A little bit about myself. I've been working at Denver Water for a little over 13 years as an in-house attorney. My practice primarily includes working on water quantity issues as well as water quality issues. And I'd say more recently, for whatever reason, it seems like I'm working on more water quality issues. Some of the projects I've been involved with recently include trying to keep operating mines in check to ensure that they are not polluting our watersheds. We're also, I have been working with our staff to expand the state reclaimed water regulation to add new uses that non-potable, that reclaimed water can be used for non-potable purposes. And we've also been assisting in Denver Water with its lead response program and assisting with compliance with the lead and copper rule. Just a little bit of background about Denver Water. We were created in 1918, 100 years ago. And we are a product of progressive era reform. We're a home rule municipality. Basically, I always tell folks that we are an independent agency of the City and County of Denver. The way I like to describe it is, if you think of the City and County of Denver and all its powers, under our charter, we have water as kind of our piece of the pie, and we exercise all powers of the city with regard to water matters. The mayor of Denver appoints our Board of Water Commissioners, and they serve on staggered terms. And we are relatively independent, which I think makes for effective management of water utility. With regard to our water rights, Denver Water is the beneficiary, I would say, of timing, geography, and hydrology. Our water rights are located in the blue area, which is the upper Colorado River Basin, and in the upper South Platte. And as a result of the location of our water rights and our diversions, we are able to divert relatively pristine sources of water for our customers. And our water rights are relatively senior for a municipality in terms of the prior appropriation system. If you look at all of the water rights in the prior appropriation system, including irrigation rights, we're probably a little bit more junior, but as far as municipalities go, we are more senior in our rights. In addition, our rights are surface rights. Other municipalities may rely more heavily on groundwater, but we are fortunate in having clean surface supplies to meet our customers' needs. A little bit about our service area. Let's see if I can go to the next map. So Denver Water's service area is approximately 335 square miles, and we serve 1.4 million people. Our service area at the heart is the City and County of Denver, and we also serve water to different types of distributors surrounding the City and County of Denver. We have master meter distributors, which are relatively autonomous and responsible for their own systems. We also have total service distributors, where Denver Water essentially operates and manages their distribution system. And we have read and bill distributors, where we read the bill and the distributor is responsible for operation of their distribution system. And we also have distributors, which we refer to as fixed amount contract users outside of Denver, where they receive raw water. And that includes Broomfield, South Adams County, and Arvada, and Westminster, among others. So I'm going to focus a little bit more in on Denver Water's treatment system. We have three use the cursor here. We have 3 potable water treatment plants, Moffett, Marston, and Foothills. And our treatment system and distribution system is an integrated system. So the water treated by those plants all go into our distribution system and goes to the customers. The treatment plants can provide a blended supply to the customers. So some days customers might be receiving a combination of Foothills and Moffett water, or Foothills and Marston water, or any other kind of combination that those treatment plants can provide. As a result, our customers are all receiving that same blended supply. Now, with regard to the quality of our drinking water, it's very high. It meets and exceeds EPA standards, we are able to use a fairly conventional treatment process because our water is so clean. We do not have to use reverse osmosis or membrane filtration or UV filtration, UV disinfection. However, we are very mindful of lead and the effect that can have on our customers' drinking water. Lead is not in the drinking water that is treated and going out from the treatment plants, but where it comes into play is from the customer service line that connects from the structure, the home served, and the main. It can also leach into the water supply from lead solder, which can be found in interior plumbing and lead fixtures. So Denver Water has been doing some work and research on figuring out where lead is located within our service area. And because historically Denver Water's customers have owned their service lines, we do not have good records of where lead service lines are located. And municipalities can vary in this on this issue. Some municipalities own their customer service lines. Some own part of their customer service lines, and in some utilities, their customers own their own service lines. Denver Water and New York fall into that category. However, we've done some research, and we have concluded that lead service lines are found in homes built around 1950 or earlier. And we were able to come to that conclusion because around 1950, the Denver Water Board looked at lead and service lines and copper service lines, which were just coming into play kind of around the mid to late 1940s, at least within the Denver metro area. And we made the decision, because copper was cheaper, easier for plumbers to work with, to require the use of copper lines instead of lead. So as a result of being able to settle on that date of 1950, we've concluded that we have 58,000 lead service lines within our service area, and we have a pretty good idea of where they are located. So we are working with a program that we've set up to try and remove the lead from our service area. We are also working with our customers by providing free water quality tests to allow our customers to determine whether they have a lead service line or lead fixtures. And we're doing a couple other items related to lead, which I hope to talk about a little bit more today. That.
All right. right, as promised, I have a few questions to kind of lead off with kind of a roundtable session here, but I hope some of these presentations and some of the answers to some of these questions are going to provoke more questions. So again, if you have your note cards, please fill those out, and if questions arise, just sort of please wave one of the water law students down, and then I'll also open it up periodically to live questions. So the first question that wanted to sort of to talk about with the panel here is how and in what ways we're thinking about water access and delivery specifically by municipal water utilities, how context matters. Dan gave us a bit of a sense that Denver Water, for instance, has been the beneficiary of time and a bit of hydrology, right, and law, right, being able to acquire water and surface water that is fresh off the Rocky Mountains. And so we've thought about this in a variety of different contexts and ones that you're all familiar with, how and in what ways neighborhoods matter. How we think about these things in terms of the scale of neighborhoods versus city, urban versus suburban, rural versus metropolitan. So that's kind of the broad question to get us started.
All right. Well, you know, one of well, I'm going to talk about two factors that I see. One is the urban-rural divide. At least with urban areas, you tend to have a bigger rate base to pay for the construction of reliable, safe drinking water systems, in contrast to some rural areas. You also have greater access to certified, trained professionals, and that can make it much easier, at least within urban areas, I think, to run a safe and reliable system. And I think rural areas have a much bigger challenge because of lack of economic resources. And the other factor I see, at least within Colorado, is the prior appropriation system. I'm a water attorney. I love the prior appropriation system, and Denver Water is the beneficiary of it to a large degree. New cities and towns that have established themselves over the last few decades have a much bigger challenge in piecing together a water portfolio that's reliable, and also that also provides a safe supply in terms of the quality aspects.
I guess I'll take it from access to clean drinking water. I think that there's different issues when you're talking about rural versus urban areas as far as what types of pollutants are potential hazards for those different communities. For instance, in the more rural areas, particularly in the southeast portion of the United States, you have a lot of the coal-fired power plants that I was mentioning in my presentation, in which those coal-fired power plants are disseminating their coal ash waste into waterways, and they are more often than not found in these really small rural areas closer to the waterways. So you have a lot of issues around the Tennessee Valley area, either Tennessee, Alabama, or Northwest Georgia, where you have a lot of issues with our good friends at Duke Energy across the state of North Carolina, and that's one issue. I think in the more urban areas, you have issues around, of course, you have issues around lead, and the piping issues, particularly as Dan was mentioning, that you have a lot of places in which these homes are very old, and they may or may not have had the resources to exchange out their pipes. I can tell you about one of my colleagues who was mentioning to me where her grandmother, who's in her 90s, is still in her home back in Baltimore, and her home is now it's uninsurable because of so many issues in the home. But of course, she doesn't want to leave her home. And then you layer upon that some of the gentrification issues that we have, where entities are coming into cities and giving many elderly Black and brown people a less amount of money for their homes and then flipping them. But do we know if they're really doing the infrastructure work to ensure that those homes are going to be safe for the next purchaser, A, and B, how much money do they get so that when the person goes to their neighbor, the next neighborhood, they'll be able to redesign the homes that they're going into to ensure that they don't have those types of water infrastructures that will harm them again. So there's a lot of different issues depending upon where you're, where the folks are living, and that's not to mention some of the air pollutants that will seep into the water eventually and cause a whole different ball of issues.
Lizeth, do you have any thoughts?
No, I mean, I think from our perspective, right, like I'm not an attorney, I'm not gonna pretend to be an attorney or to understand any of the law around this. I think for us, like I think the biggest shock that we had when we came to this issue is that we haven't just canvassed in these areas. We do a lot of canvassing in our work. We've canvassed in wealthy areas, upper middle class areas, and working class communities. And the only area where this issue came to us, we were not asking this question at the door, right? We weren't telling people, hey, do you drink their water? Do you think your water is safe? People told us this when we were at the door. Is a surprise that we happened to find this in an area that's mostly people of color. Both Montbello and Commerce City are majority folks of color, and an area where it's mostly working class communities, right? Like the average household income is $60,000 or under. And so for us, I think that was like the biggest sort of surprise. Just because we've canvassed in different areas and coming to here. And then the other thing is that the Colorado Trust, which is a local foundation here, did a report last year around levels of lead within students. And they went to classrooms to ask and do tests on students. And the areas where they found levels of lead within the students, it was Commerce City, it was Montbello, and it was Green Valley Ranch. So areas in the Denver metro area where it's mostly low-income communities, right? And a lot of the issues could be the plumbing and the housing. We just have no clue what's happening in those areas, right? We also have a huge plant in Commerce City that's not just contaminating Commerce City, right? But it's also contaminating the surrounding areas around that area. And those areas is mostly communities of color and low-income communities.
Thank you. So one of the questions you all gave is one that we all came up together. So great minds think alike, right? And so I guess this is a bit of a hybrid. But the big question is how do each of you work in each of your different capacities? So Khyla, you with your particular clients. Lizeth, you've talked a little bit about it, your constituents. Dan, how does Denver Water work with its customers? Like, how do you work to empower each of your constituents to know their rights when it comes to water? And I think tied, and this is a question, this is a more broader question that was asked, is how do we empower our communities, our lawyers, our budding lawyers to advocate for and achieve clear and equitable access to water?
So my job is I represent the NAACP Inc. itself, but we work with our units on the ground to link them with our environmental climate justice to really research some of these issues. And then we also partner with some of our friends in the environmental justice community. So like the litigation work that we're doing in North Carolina, we're partnering with the Southern Environmental Law Center, which is based in North Carolina, who's doing really great work around this coal ash issue. We also work with our friends with Earth Justice and the Sierra Club to partner with folks who are really concerned about this issue, but also are concerned about the environmental justice aspect of it, and not just kind of the broader environmental issue, because I think as Camille spoke about earlier today, it really is important that you're looking at it from an environmental justice lens. And so All of our units, they have committees that will do some research about what's going on in their area, and then we can work with them to determine which of the many different avenues of advocacy they want to go through. Are they looking to petition their local or state governments? Are they looking to file litigation? If they're looking to file litigation, we work with them to develop their complaints, work with our outside counsel to file litigation, and then we follow it along with our units. And as they are going through the litigation process, we're also continuing with the media strategy that the NAACP, of course, is known for, being able to match our litigation and advocacy with media to enlighten what's going on, leveraging the brand that we've worked on for 109 years to enlighten what the other issues that are going on around coal ash or whatever they're trying to advocate for. Lastly, I would say that we also come together each year at our national convention. And so all of our units from across the country and around the globe are able to be in one setting at the same time. And that's where they're getting training about some of these issues so that they can really get a deep dive. I think in many communities of color, there's not as many of us working in the environmental space, and so it's a learning curve that some of us have to go through as far as what's going on. They know the importance of having clean drinking water, but they may not know the nuances of environmental justice work and how there are laws that they can advocate around or utilize to advocate for their issues. And so it's bringing folks together so that we can empower them to know about these issues and then going back into their communities to advocate.
Yeah, I mean, and for us, like we have a member-led model, so our members lead our work. So part of what we do is we offer leadership trainings. We believe that those who are most directly impacted by the issues should be the ones at the front lines leading the charge for change. But we have to make sure that people have the tools that they need in order to be able to lead and be successful. So we do different leadership trainings throughout the year to ensure that people have the tools in order to be able to lead, and a lot of information sharing about what does it mean to change policy, what does it mean to be active in your community, and all those things. And specifically for our organization, because we're multi-issue, we have our membership rep, which is about 90% folks of color. And then we have core groups that are part of leading the different campaigns. So we have a core group of folks that have been leading our climate justice work, that have been really looking into how does this work. And I would just say part of the reason why, like as an organization, we could have come to Mount Bello and Commerce City last year when we found this issue and proposed a solution and said, let's do this, right? Like we have the solution, we're gonna go find some attorneys, we're gonna go work with the Denver Water Department, we're gonna do all this stuff, right? But part of it is that we have to make sure that we allow people who are most directly impacted to be the ones that lead and not do things for them, right? We have to make sure that we come to the community and rather than telling them what the solution is asking them, right? People know best. People who are directly impacted know the best solution for themselves. So what we're gonna be doing this year is going back to the doors, right, to like begin the process to really allow community and give the community the information of what are the possibilities of things that we could do here. And then so really the people that live in those areas are the ones that are leading and telling us what they want us to do in order for them to be able to lead the change and find out what's going on in their water.
And before Dan answers, I just want to reiterate what Lizeth says. She knows a little bit about this. I've been trying to figure out ways that the University of Denver generally could partner with Lizeth's organization, and it's been very clear. This is something that's not going to be led by the University of Denver. It's not going to be necessarily something led by Lizeth. It's going to be led by the members. The members meet once a month, and we need to work on that timeline and that time scale. And certainly for those of us that are lawyers, right? Those of us that are professors, those of us that work on an academic scale, we need to check ourselves and understand, right, that being able to do this work is not on the timeline that we're usually accustomed to. And I think that's part of our learning process that we've had. So
one of the things we're doing, as I mentioned earlier, is providing the free water quality tests for lead. I'm just curious if, has anybody in the room taken Denver Water up on the opportunity to do a free water quality test on lead? Yeah, great. I encourage you to, if you think you might have a home with lead, to go to Denver Water's website. You can fill out a form and you'll receive a box, and you can perform the test yourself and then return it to Denver Water. We'll perform the analysis and report the results to you. We also use the results to inform our lead service line inventory. So it's a win-win. Denver Water also provides a number of educational materials to help educate our customers about the risks of lead. Those educational materials are provided in both English and Spanish. And we also work with our customers in terms of the affordability issue to provide programs to help them pay for the removal of lead service lines. We are piloting a project with the Denver Urban Renewal Authority where we have established a revolving loan fund. And through that program, customers are eligible for low and no interest loans to have their lead service line removed. It's very convenient, and we've opened it up to anybody without regard to income, although income may affect the amount of interest you would pay for the loan. In addition, we are also working with customers to provide affordability programs for water. We have basically a customer assistance program, and we in 2016 adopted a new rate structure that better recognizes the need to provide affordable water. 3 of the tiers in the new rate structure are based on wintertime base use. So that excludes your summertime irrigation demand. And if you're using water within that wintertime base use, you receive very affordable water rates.
Dan, this is kind of a follow-up question to just what you're talking about, and I'm just curious. And so the question asked is testing for Denver Water, is it not expensive? And I think you've addressed a little bit about that, but I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about what Denver Water does is atypical or not as a water utility. Some of the ways that you described how you think about affordability and access and trying to figure out if there's a problem with your users. So yeah, to the extent that you get the sense that what Denver Water does is atypical or not.
Gosh, that's a hard question. I don't want to presume to know what other water utilities do. I think some are offering similar programs. Another thing that we've done recently is we've partnered with Denver Public Schools, Littleton Public Schools, and I believe Cherry Creek Public Schools to assist them with their lead testing. And I imagine a number of other utilities are doing something similar.
And I'm struck a little bit by, I don't know if Camille's in here, but she certainly identified there's good water utilities and bad water utilities, right? And I think for the students in here, there's not a lot of good research and data done on water utilities. I know we've talked about that in my water law class, and I think that's certainly something for the future to think about. I mean, I think just as sort of best practices, right? Particularly for those people that are interested in water justice work, to see, what we can learn from one another and what we might, want to avoid in the future. So, I have a whole bunch of questions from all of you. But does anybody want to ask a live question? Get up, stretch. Sam?
I would like to thank, of course, I would like to thank the speakers and also thanks the organizers, Water Law Review, for delivering this fine symposium. My question is about the first topic, which was like water pollution, civil right. And it took many decades for hardworking women and men to get water to be recognized as a human right. And when it finally did, we didn't know what it means. So other than the Millennium Development Goals that were replaced in 2015 by Sustainable Development Goals, it's not a secret that it's not uncommon that access to water, whether in terms of quality or in terms of quantity, is more expensive for the poor community rather than the better off. So my question is today, is how do you see solidarity under water law, especially that we have some of the most recognized professors in water law, Professor Romero, Justice Hobbs. How do you see this solidarity could happen under a complex system of a water law?
I think that in any movement, you have to work together with like-minded folks to get anything done. So I think that it's necessary for us to come together, which is why Lindsay's work with this symposium is so very important, and we're grateful for it. Because we need to learn, like I said, I just played this person on TV, like I'm not a water law attorney. But just in the 4 months since I first met Lindsay and to learn more about how deep this runs, it's going to be imperative for us to work together as a collective to get some of these injustices regarding water eradicated.
Other thoughts?
You know, I want to be very optimistic about the future. I do believe, though, that we're going to see an increasingly tough challenge trying to balance quality against scarcity of water. As we try and close the demand-supply gap under the state water plan, we see a huge gap in the future that's going to be difficult to close. We're going to be dealing with, I think, less and less clean water supplies that we're going to need to find ways to treat to ensure that folks are receiving reliable and safe drinking water supplies. And I'd like to think that technology will provide a solution, but we also have to find better ways to manage our water holistically, including wastewater and stormwater, if we're going to get there.
The previous panels, I think, talked about, I think it's very powerful ways about the importance of having a place at the table. And I think one of the challenges here, the previous two panels, one of the ways that you have a place at the table is because you own a water right, right? It's recognized in the law, whether it's the Sekia law, whether it's tribal water rights. You can force, maybe force is the wrong word, right? But you can be around a table to try to find common solutions, right, tied around the water right. We're talking about municipal water supply, we're talking about customers, right? Who don't necessarily own a water right, but they're buying a product, buying a good. And so there's a series of questions here that I think is appropriate for this panel, is to sort of think about from that perspective, right? And we saw it coming out of Professor Panu's talk at the plenary. I think implicit within Sam's question about the millennial goals is, does Colorado or just other states generally, does Michigan, does Georgia, does Maryland, do they need to move to something like what California has with a human right to water? As I see it, right, that provides some places, you know, at least an opening to have a seat at the table, right, in ways that places that don't have that might not. And so I guess that's for the panel to think about is, are there mechanisms that we can imagine that would provide transform these customers, right, into those that have enforceable rights?
Well, I would say it is, from a utilities perspective, it is challenging from an economic standpoint because providing service to new customers is not cheap. costs money to put pipe in the ground and new treated water storage and pumping facilities. But I think it's something that we have to think about. I thought the law that the keynote speaker referred to in California was very intriguing. At Denver Water, we recently had an experience with a distributor that was responsible for its own system, and it just was clear that it was no longer up to the task of managing an aging system, and we worked out an arrangement to convert the distributor to I believe a total service distributor, meaning that Denver Water's taking on a lot more responsibility for maintenance of the distributor's infrastructure. But that was a very expensive endeavor, and we had to find creative ways to finance it.
And I would just add, like, as the grassroots organizer in the panel, I would just say, yes, absolutely. Like water is a human right, and we should see it that way, right, and work on it that way. And then something that I would just pose as intriguing, right, something that made me think when you were asking that question, right, like who owns it, right? People with money. Like if you think about corporations like Nestle, they have the money, right, to buy the water, and then they can turn that and turn it into profit for them. And what's happening is that our communities are turning around because they don't drink the water from the faucet, and they turn around and buy bottled water from Nestle, was getting water that should be ours to begin with, right? So just posing that like complexity of the role of corporations too when we think about water. And from my perspective, it's like, yes, like we need it to be able to survive. Everyone has to drink water every day. We need it for everything that we do. So absolutely, we should be looking at it to a human justice lens and making sure that everyone has the ability to access water.
I think I would like to piggyback on what Lizeth said, is that everybody has to have the right to water, but do we need to pass a law that says everyone has a human right to water? I don't know about that same. Those are two different things for me. Because as you said, you cannot sustain yourself without water. At a certain brink of time, I used to be a nurse in my former life, you can't sustain yourself. But do I think that we need to pass a law that says that? Because what's behind that? What does that mean? How is that really enforced, right? We allegedly have the right to vote, but when certain people need to have access to that power, you see very nefarious things happening to shift who gets access to something that is supposed to be a right for all, right? Just very quickly, when you had the issue in Flint, everybody was affected by this, but they delayed getting clean drinking and bathing water to those who were incarcerated. And so they were even more damaged by that. But does anybody really talk about those folks who are incarcerated, because that's them, right? But they too have the right to have clean drinking water while they are incarcerated, just like people who are not incarcerated. So when we talk about fundamental rights, or a human right, I need to see what's behind that glass, because until that is teased out for me, it gives me the shakes a little bit, just because I just don't know. And very quickly, like I just came back from South Africa not too long ago, and after apartheid, they have, that was one of the things that President Mandela issued, was that there was a constitutional right to water. But as I traveled around the country, you still saw people who did not have access to water 20 years after he was first inaugurated, 24 years after he was inaugurated. So how long is it going to take for that to get actualized? And in the meantime, what happens to people who still every day need to have access to clean drinking water? You know what I mean? So I don't know is the short answer. Yeah.
One thing I'll just sort of very quickly throw out, and we talked a little bit about this as a panel, is there's a political dimension to this. And this goes back to the grassroots organizing. I just printed up an email I received a couple days ago from, this comes out of California, from the Community Water Center, El Centro Comunitario por el Agua. They just released a report, Untapped Opportunity, Local Water Boards in the Fight for Water Justice. And the report found that in the southern Joaquin Valley alone, fully 87% of local water board seats were uncontested in the most recent election. Has 500 local seats on water boards. And so I guess there's a political dimension to this, and I sort of think about this, what would happen if the civil rights, what would happen, for instance, and I sort of come out, I was born here and raised here in Denver, what if the Chicano movement, instead of sort of focusing on schools, focused on the Denver Water Board in the 1960s? What would that look like, right? And so I think that's just in terms of thinking about the solidarity, right? How and in what ways we sort of understand the way that both power works and that laws work, right? And so we operate within a system that does give people the possibility and the potential to have a seat at the table, right? Even in the absence of things like the human right to water. So I'm going to consolidate some other questions here too, and I'm going to and I might read a couple of these out because I think they get to the broader question, and it'll probably be our last question here today. And from all of your perspectives, how do we identify the root causes of inequity in the access and delivery of a safe, usable water supply? So more precisely, how do we know that these are issues of affordability rather than racial or other forms of social discrimination, or they might be just problems in the quality of water at the source location, or hydrology, or other factors? And other factors here that some of you have identified. Is there some concern that immigrant communities are less trusting of public water systems because of the quality of the water in the countries they migrated from, right? Is this something that we need to take into account? There are issues of access and of rates and climate change, and how and in what ways might those sorts of pieces amplify, right, other forms of pre-existing social inequality. So it's a complex problem, but at the end of the day, how do each of you attempt to diagnose it?
We're going to solve it all today. So just to address a couple of points, and I would just go back to like sort of the politics of it, right? Like something that I think our organization has found is there's a clear lack of political will for our elected officials and people in power to address the issues that our communities are facing, right? And until we get elected officials that actually care about what's happening in our communities, then we're not going to be able to address this issue. So it comes to like political will for us. And something that I would just say, as you were talking about the water boards, last year we started doing some research on this, and we looked at the Adams County Water Board. And so we were like, how can we change? So we actually get people that will care and that will work with community to find a solution and everything else. And surprisingly, we found that in order to be on the Adams County Water Board, you have to own land. Like that is a requirement. Someone that rents an apartment, which is mostly our communities, which a lot of the community in Commerce City rents a house to be able to be there, you have to be a landowner in order to run for the Adams County Board, right? And then the second part is that the election is sometime in the middle of May, and the only way that it's publicized is through the local newspaper. So how, like the accessibility from our community to be able to be on those roles and to be able to be part of those roles is completely non-existent, right? And then you add the complexity that a lot of those communities that live there are actually immigrants, right? So coming to that and then understanding how things work, like do people even know that there's a Denver Water Board department? That they could actually go to them, right? Do people even have the information to be able to access those things, right? So I think for us, like this is just extremely complex, and in order to address it and find solutions, we have to tackle it from different levels, and it's gonna take all of us. Like it's gonna take attorneys, it's gonna take elected officials, it's gonna take community organizations, it's gonna take a lot of people to actually address these issues. And then on the root causes, like I will just go back a little bit to, I think it's all the issues, right? I don't think it's just one. And I would go back to like the corporate role of like the corporation's role in water, right? And how they turn around and sell water to folks. And then also we'll say like the role of like oil and gas industry here in Colorado. And a big example is that they're doing fracking mostly in low-income communities and communities of color. And a big example is city of Greeley. They have fracking wells in the areas that are mostly populated by Latino communities and low-income communities. And right now there's a big fight because they're trying to open up a fracking well across a school that is 90% students of color, right? So like also to expose like the role of oil and gas in our state. And then the other one will be affordability, right? Like I think when I say we're facing a crisis in Colorado, I mean it because I hear it from our members every day. They can't afford to live in their community, so they're being displaced and pushed out into different areas. So like, let's say for example, right, we're successful this year when we go back to the doors, we're able to get tests done. And let's say that we find that the problem is the piping in the houses, right? How are we going to turn around, right, and ensure that all those people are able to fix the problem that's in their house, or even let alone help them get a filter for their water in their houses if they're being barely able to pay their rent and buy food and all of that stuff, right? So it's really complex, and I think for us it's all of them, right? It's affordability, it's the role of our elected officials, it's the role of corporations, and it's also our role as we're all impacted by water issues, and what are we going to do to actually support communities to make sure everyone has access to water.
And the role of politics cannot be understated. Being engaged, having a civic engagement mindset, no matter where you are, is essential to solving these problems. Like Lizeth said, it's on politicians, but of course politicians are pushed by the people. You don't get the Voting Rights Act if it was not pushed by the people and also illuminating what was going on in places like Selma, Alabama and Birmingham, where people were literally being slaughtered just because they wanted to get access to the vote. You have to push people. They're not just going to, they didn't just pass it just because. You didn't get the vote, the housing, the Fair Housing Act just because. No, you got it 50 years ago because 50 years ago, this coming Wednesday, Dr. King was slaughtered on a motel balcony in Memphis, Tennessee. I believe it was no more than 3 months later then is when the Fair Housing Act was finally passed by Congress and signed into law. And so we have to galvanize all of us to push members of Congress and inform our communities about what is going on and how do you get access. And though many of our communities may not be homeowners, who are the homeowners who believe like we believe that everybody should have access to clean drinking water, that we can coalesce around to push to become a member of those boards? Or do you just have to be an 18-year-old person and sign up so that you can run for that office? Or are you appointed by your governor and do you just have to connect with somebody in the governor's office? How do these things work? The last thing I'll say is that currently the EPA is determining whether or not they're going to roll back the coal ash rule that was finally put into place in 2015. Do people know about that? How are you galvanizing around those types of issues? We cannot extrapolate out the role of politics in all of these different things. And so unless we're coming together as civil rights communities and immigrants communities and just free-thinking people that understand that we're either all in this together or we all perish together, then it's going to be difficult for us to push our ball forward.
Dan, how's that?
So with regard to the root causes, I think economics plays a huge factor. If you don't have a healthy rate base for your utility, the utility isn't going to be healthy. And to the extent that utilities customers are economically succeeding, it's going to undermine the ability of the utility to provide, I think, safe and reliable drinking water. Age of the community is also a factor, at least I think here in Colorado. And I think geographic location, with regard to, again, rural utilities, somehow we have to find a way to take advantage of economies of scale to help provide a stronger economic base for those utilities. And with regard to the issue of building trust with immigrant communities, it is a challenge. A couple of years ago, Denver Water was reaching out to an immigrant community, and I think it was the Westwood community. And we were partnering with Delta Dental. Delta Dental was very concerned about the lack of potable water use within these communities because they were seeing a lot of dental decay from children not drinking tap water, and instead drinking soda and other sugary beverages. And that's largely because of, I think, distrust of drinking water supplies from the tap. And so we reached out to this community and we were preparing an ad campaign. And the lead issue is something that we had to keep in mind. I mean, we want to say that we have safe, reliable drinking water, but we also have to tell our ratepayers and customers that you need to be careful about lead and mindful of it. And take precautions, use the filter, get your water tested. And so it does muddle the message to some extent, but we have to find ways to build trust with our customers.
And on that note, let's give this panel a big thank you.